Arthur Dong joins me now for a closer look on tariffs and the economy and all things China. He's a teaching professor at Georgetown University's School of Business. Good to have you, sir. There was a simpler time in the world where we just talked about U.S. and China. And I feel like things have gotten a lot more complicated, right? You've got lockdowns, you've got unlockdowns, you've got the housing issue in China, you've got rates. The list goes on. I don't even know where to begin, but one thing I do know is that both economies, the U.S. and China, seem to be at an inflection point right now.
Yes, that's certainly correct. What occurred yesterday was the sort of expiration of the comment period on the current Section 301 trade tariffs that were imposed in the summer of 2018. And those tariffs, which amount to close to $400 billion, is now up for renewal. And so where the United States Trade Representative Office, stands on this, as well as the Biden administration stands on this issue, is going to be all important as it regards the economy of China as well as the economy of the United States.
We haven't heard a lot about this. Obviously, we are talking about it, but from the White House, we haven't heard a lot other than from a couple months ago when they said that by reducing the tariffs, it would help alleviate some of the inflation that the U.S. is experiencing. Do you view that silence from the White House as a positive or a negative in relation to these talks?
I think I'd view it neither. I'd view it as neutral. What's occurring in the White House is there's emerging within the Biden White House two opposing viewpoints with regard to the dissolution or continuation of these tariffs. Now, on the one hand, we've heard Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen strongly advocate for the dissolution or dismemberment of the current tariffs, as it will go a long ways towards resolving and reducing the inflationary impact that American consumers are facing at the current moment. On the other hand, the national security sort of wing of the White House is advocating for the continuation of these tariffs, as they feel this is one of the few bargaining chips that the United States still has on the table in order to, in a sense, moderate China's response as it regards Taiwan.
When you mean moderate and when you mean bargaining chip or chips, I think it's bigger than just Taiwan. I think there's a whole host of issues between the U.S., from climate change to what's happening in Ukraine to again, what's happening in the region around Taiwan, that maybe the U.S. is trying to get China to move one way or the other. But what do you mean when you say bargaining chip?
Well, what I'm saying is that at least, with the current imposition of those tariffs and the continuation of those tariffs, the United States can continue to hold pressure and impose pressure on China in terms of coming to the bargaining table and addressing some of these great fault line issues that currently exist between these two nations, one of which happens to be Taiwan. And I would agree with you that there are many more issues or points of contention between these two nations. Now, the United States is at a particularly interesting moment regarding these tariffs, because if the United States were to reduce these tariffs, they certainly will have a deflationary impact on the American consumer. And we all know that, for those that reside at the bottom of the American pyramid, they're the ones that are suffering the most as a result of the increase in energy prices as well as food prices. So I think Biden is a pretty sophisticated, political operator, and I think he understands that he has to deliver in a midterm election and show and demonstrate that the administration is taking some positive steps towards reducing or alleviating inflation as it relates to the American consumer's pocketbook. He's also well aware that when it comes to the electorate, what animates the American electorate are pocketbook issues. And he understands that at this moment of time, if he can find some way to reduce this inflationary impact by offering a wider variety and abundance of Chinese goods coming into the American marketplace tariff-free, that will have an immediate impact in terms of at least the American pocketbook and their perceptions of the Biden presidency.
So if I go down this path of if removing tariffs means moderating inflation, the reverse must also be true as well. By adding on the tariffs in 2018, that also helped exacerbated the inflation that we see today. Would that be a fair argument?
I think it's a very fair argument, and it's not an argument that's an argument that's shared not only by myself, but a wide variety of economists across the board. And there have been studies that have demonstrated that, these tariffs have come in at a minimum of 7.5% and range all the way to 15% or more. So if you remove 7.5% from the cost of a piece of clothing or a pair of shoes, well, that's certainly going to, alleviate and help the American consumer. It's also been suggested that the U.S. Treasury has collected over $70 billion worth of tariffs since the imposition of the 301, Section 301 tariffs. Thereby, wouldn't it be better, I may ask, if that $71 billion were placed back into the wallets of American consumers? So I think, yes, the tariffs have had an impact, an inflationary impact, and I think the thoughtful removal or selective removal of some of these tariffs might go a long way.
So at this point of the negotiations, we haven't heard a whole lot. I imagine it's sort of, let's go with what you said. It's neutral since we haven't heard anything. But from the Chinese perspective, is there something they could do to, or say that we haven't heard, at least in the headlines, to push or prod the White House along, or by doing so, would that possibly backfire? Is doing nothing or saying nothing and keeping it sort of behind the scenes a better strategy for China? Because I imagine that China would want these tariffs to be removed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at least behind the scenes, diplomatically, they're saying as so. I think Biden is being very careful because he doesn't want to offer the Republican Party a gotcha issue. Because we know with his political opposition, the opposing party will not miss any opportunity to bring up the fact that Biden is soft on China. So by reducing the tariffs, he's setting himself up for a potential landmine in which the Republican Party during an election year, as the midterms are coming up, can turn around and say, well, look at Biden and look at the Democrats. They're soft on China. And so this is why you haven't been hearing much emanating from the White House. And this is being hotly debated right now in the Oval Office. So where this goes, I think, is certainly going to be very, very interesting. But I think that the United States is in a far better position today to accommodate greater Chinese exports for one reason. And the reason being is Chinese exports were thought to have displaced American jobs. But in the current moment, we are in a moment of full employment. As a matter of fact, there isn't an industry in America that's not suffering from some degree of labor shortage. So if those tariffs were to be removed, consumer goods prices were to be reduced, there'll be no loss of jobs in America because we are at a full employment, and we can accommodate that at the present moment.
It's been a fascinating conversation, Professor Arthur Dong. I look forward to seeing what compromises might be made in the near future. From Georgetown University's Business School, our good friend Arthur Dong, thank you very much. Just fascinating analysis. Next up.